Hi, everybody. My name is Dave Corlew, and I'm the senior pastor at Arlington Countryside Church, and I'm super glad that you're with us right now. We're doing a webinar, and we're calling it Self-Care in Trying Times. This pandemic, the craziness of our world lately, it's been really, really difficult, and we were just feeling the need to come alongside of you and provide some help, some encouragement, some additional hope, and hopefully you find that. And so I'm going to have a conversation right now with two good friends of mine. They also happen to be two true ACC people. They're a part of our church, and I appreciate them very much. And so I want to introduce you to Val. Okay, here it is. I've been working on this pronunciation. Rouseo.
Nailed it.
Did I nail it?
You did. Way to go.
Woohoo, Val Rouseo. Okay. And Matt Ross. Okay. Val and Matt, if you would, Val first, take 60 seconds and introduce yourselves. Tell us about you. Okay.
Sure. So I am Valerie Rouseo. My maiden name was Farmer, so switching from Farmer to Rouseo was not an easy transition. So, Dave, no problem with the pronunciation. I get that all the time. Like, how do you say your last name? Oh, you should just stick with Farmer. So I am a licensed professional counselor. I work in private practice. I have my master's degree in clinical mental health. I do individual work, couples work, and then I work with families as well. I have worked with folks that are in recovery with addiction, people who have severe and pervasive mental health issues, as well as working with families around addiction as well. So I'm currently in private practice, which I love. That really affords me the flexibility to work with people really kind of all over the place. And then I also do group work as well on weekend intensives. I've been going to ACC for about 3 years. My husband and I attend. We've done guest services. It feels really sad to not be the greeters at the door, the people, giving the, welcoming everyone into the door. So I'm like, oh man, we haven't really felt like doing guest services just because we haven't been in person. And then we recently had a baby. So we have an 8-week-old son. His name is Theo. Which you may hear him in the background crying. It's about lunchtime for him. So if you hear a baby in the background, that's him. He's saying, hey, from down the hall.
Congratulations on that, Val. Are you super sleep deprived right now?
Actually, right now I'm doing okay. For being an 8-week-old, he's already sleeping through the nights, which we're like, I know, like, please, thank you. Let's keep it up.
Do you know how many young mothers want to reach through the screen and strangle you right now?
I know. So thankfully, he's a pretty good sleeper and a good eater. So we're grateful for that. But so I'm feeling good, rested, which feels weird to say because usually new moms are not rested, but I'm personally grateful for that. So
no doubt. That's awesome. Matt.
Yeah, so I've been, Christy, my wife and I have been attending ACC for 11 years now, 11 years. And we started attending just before our first child was born, Ian. And so now we have a 10-year-old and Brody, our 7-year-old. So our family's really grown up in ACC and continued to do so. So that's been exciting, been a great decade or so. Professionally, I'm a clinical psychologist. Been in practice for many years. I've worked in several different settings. Currently, I'm in private practice. I work mostly with adults these days, with a lot of marriage counseling. I work with the older population quite a bit as well, one of my niches. In the past, I've worked in school systems. I've worked in nursing homes and community centers. And so I've worked hard to try to work with a lot of different populations. Because I'm really, my focus is on working with couples and families. And when you work with families, that brings everything to the table, schools and kids and older parents and medical issues and you name it. So I've tried very hard to expand my experience into lots of different areas.
Well, I'm so grateful that each of you are willing to do this. I think you're very gifted, very competent people. And and to integrate your faith as well into all that you do, I think is just really powerful. So we appreciate being able to tap into your expertise on this whole topic of self-care. Self-care in trying times. So let's talk for a few minutes about this time that we live in. It's so crazy. It's so weird. I've heard the term unprecedented used numerous times. What is it? What are the dynamics involved that make this time so difficult? In other words, it's kind of asking why are we doing this webinar? What comes to mind for you?
Something I was thinking about when you said this term that we've all heard around it just being an unprecedented time. Another, like, one of these catchphrases is like, well, this is just the new normal. This is just like what we need to be doing right now because of the pandemic, which is true. And what's also true is that it's not normal. So these times are unprecedented and it is a new normal, but it's not normal. So of course it's really activating for all of us around just the different changes of expectations with work and family life and how we're all doing that actually might not be well, even though the expectation is that we just adapt, right? So this idea that we should all just be fine. It is what it is. It's going to pass. Everything will be okay. When really it doesn't actually seem like it's okay. And I know for myself, it has not been okay during certain times and during certain periods, just because this isn't what any of us are used to, you know?
Yeah.
So this time of it being unprecedented and the new normal isn't, just because of how we're all wired and us all being used to and accustomed to our old lives. And so it's been hard. This adjustment has been hard, just period, because none of us know what we're doing in a pandemic, right? Like, this is the first go around for all of us.
Exactly.
Yeah. Another thing that came to my mind was the fact that we certainly in this country are very accustomed to certain freedoms, and to be told, to be informed that we must isolate ourselves and really retreat back from a lot of these freedoms that most of us, many of us, have every day, has been very, very challenging. We have this fallacy that we like to believe we control a lot of things in our lives, and we've been faced with the fact there's an awful lot of things in life that we do not really have all that much control over. And that's been a very difficult thing for all of us to come to grips with, I think.
Yeah. And so the pandemic, and dealing with COVID-19, there's fears of getting it or someone you love getting it, and then how your body's going to respond to it, right? And then the stresses of all the different work, how you do work and how you do family life has changed. And just there's so much. And social isolation because of the pandemic, it's been very difficult. And then you think of 2020. And you pile on top of that the race issues, and the police shootings and the riots and all the conflict around that. It's very disconcerting and very difficult for people. And then you add to that the election season that we just got through. And it was so divisive, so polarizing and so ugly and uncivil, and and the news is coming at you constantly, and we had that, and then we're heading into the holidays now, and it's really one of the reasons for the timing of this webinar, right, is now we're heading into Thanksgiving, we're heading into Christmas, and it's not going to be the kind of holidays we've been used to. For the most part, for most of us, it's going to be kind of a letdown, So that's a lot.
And holiday season is often a very challenging season for many people anyway, with grief or loss or feelings of isolation during the best of times. And 2020 is certainly not the best of times.
Yeah, so you understand, I think for a person to struggle is certainly nothing to be embarrassed by or be surprised of. I mean, 2020 has been really, really hard. and so hopefully there's a sense of need for some self-care, right? And making sure we're healthy in our entire being, being healthy spiritually, being healthy physically, emotionally, psychologically, all those areas. God has made us as whole people, right? And we can't compartmentalize and just, oh, I just got to focus on this. But man, we've got a lot. But in preparing for this, we were talking about how there can be some misunderstandings about using the term self-care, right? So let's kick that around a little bit for anyone who might be questioning this whole topic, right?
Yeah, I think so. What's interesting about the term self-care is that it actually is like pretty cultural, in that like there's lots of posts on social media around, oh, like take care of yourself or ways to, be your best self and all these things. But oftentimes that has to do with like, I know for women, like, oh, take care of yourself, do a face mask, or, if you're able to soak your feet or whatever it is, or do something to help yourself feel beautiful, or do something to treat yourself, or have a glass of wine and have a treat, that'll help you feel better. Take care of yourself. Or for men, that might look like having some beer or, gaming or kind of checking out or, self-care, when really that's far from the concept when it actually boils down to it. So self-care is more or less like, what do we actually need? What is required of a person to actually feel their best and actually genuinely care for themselves?
Isn't that selfish though? I mean, what's our focus to be? I mean, and where can you find legitimacy in self-care?
Yeah, and I think that so something like a difference in the nuance of words is oftentimes self-care might feel selfish when it's an indulgence. So it's like if it's indulging around feeling like, oh, I'm gonna have a treat and overeat, or I'm gonna take some time to be by myself and game and kind of check out. That actually might feel selfish for some people when it comes to family life, or if there's a feeling of it not actually feeling good because it's not actually taking care of self, even though it might feel like it because of the cultural assumption or idea that drinking, eating, gaming, doing things that are frivolous might feel selfish, right? Which is why it's different than self-care. And so self-care has to do more so around like a person's actual physical biological need, which sometimes actually is the opposite of what self-care might look like, around making sure that a person's drinking enough water or like eating healthy, which I don't like to do all the time, right? Like if I'm not feeling good, a cupcake would taste better than having a salad or drinking a big glass of water instead of having a Pepsi or a Coke or whatever it is, And so that's why I think it's so hard to figure out or to navigate or manage, because there's a disparity when it comes to maybe what would feel good versus actually what is good for ourselves.
Yeah, I agree. And I hear this fallacy that often that thinking about my needs is selfish. That the very concept of self-care is something that's non-scriptural, is what I'll hear, and I don't think that's accurate. I think
why not,
often,
Matt?
Yeah, but well, and you correct me, Dave, if I'm wrong here.
No,
but I mean, I hear this all the time, especially from Christians, that they'll quote something like, "We're supposed to love thy neighbor and put others' needs before our own," or even think of others rather than ourselves. And I don't see that in Scripture. I see love thy neighbor as thyself. But let's think of what that means. What does love thy neighbor mean? It means to care for, to support, to encourage, to tend to the needs of those around us. In the same way we do ourselves, as we do ourselves. So there's an implication there, I think, that Christ is saying that there's an expectation. We are tending to our needs, not all of our wants, right? That's a different thing. But tending to our physical, emotional, psychological, spiritual needs in the same way that he wants us to do for others. And cannot be there for others fully if we're not tending to our own needs. So
Right.
I think self-care is very, not only just scriptural, you know, Christ was asked, what is the number one commandment? And he didn't give them one, he gave them two.
Mhm.
Love God with all your heart and mind and soul and body and strength, and you name it, and do the same for yourself and for others. And so it was so important that he couldn't give just one. He said, here's
Mhm.
one A and here's one B. I'll give you
Mhm.
two. So I think self-care is as scriptural as it gets.
Yeah, and you know what it reminds me of is if you've ever been on an airplane flight and they give the pre-flight lecture, right?
Mm.
And remember they say in case of loss of cabin pressure, a mask will drop down. And what do they say to parents who are traveling with children?
Mm.
Do they say take care of your kid first?
No.
Nope.
They say put your own mask on first and then help your child. That sounds horrible. What kind of selfish parent would take care of their own oxygen needs before their kid? But why do they do that? Well, because if you're passed out due to lack of oxygen, your kid's in trouble, right?
Yep.
You better take care of
Right.
yourself first, and then you can address the needs. And I think that's kind of a good metaphor for what we're talking about here, that that's not
Yeah.
selfish at all. You know, that's what
No.
needs to happen, right?
Right. And like, while it is so ideal for every person to want to take care of themselves, what's interesting is that it's actually the hardest to do that. And Matt, when you were talking around like what it would look like to take care of our neighbors and to love one another as Christ does, I'm like, wow, I'm like, why is it so hard then for me to love myself first? And it just seems like it's easier to put everything or everyone before myself or before that. And I think some of that is like, I don't always want to look at myself. Like, I don't always want to
Mm.
myself because sometimes that's a mess, right? So here's a better idea. How about I just not look at me and I'll just instead put a focus on taking care of my husband and the house and my community. And oh, I saw some people around the corner that would benefit from maybe a check-in, or wow, I really heard that someone was hurting and I'll quick make a phone call, right? And all that does as well, all those are very beautiful gestures. It just further makes it worse around me not paying attention to myself, which then I can sometimes plummet. We can sometimes plummet when we're ignoring or not paying attention to ourselves and instead keeping the focus external or on others, which again isn't bad all the time. It's really important for us to have an eye out for people around and to be caring and loving. And though when it comes at the expense of how things are going on with ourselves or myself, ultimately, what good is that, right? Like, how effective or how good of a loving person can I be when I'm not paying attention to myself because I'm so focused on everything else?
Yeah. Yep. And I think ultimately then, you know, we can best minister to others and best help others if we're coming from a healthy place, right? If we're energized and we know who we are and we're in connection with God and we're getting enough sleep, and you know, it allows us to optimize being a people helper, you know. But if we just sacrifice, ignore ourselves, don't take care of ourselves, we're going to crash and burn, you know. And ultimately the level of care we're giving others is going to diminish, you know, and the quality is going to go down because you can't give what you don't have, right? You can't pour out of an empty cup. And so
And one other thing, Dave, Val, thought I had when you were speaking was another trap we can fall into is in the same way that I might be overcommitted to caring for those around me rather than looking inside and what I need to do for myself. I can expect others to fill my needs fully or completely. Like, rather than me taking care of myself, I expect others to do that, and they can do some, but there's no way someone else can fill all of my needs the way that I know myself better than they do, hopefully. So that's another trap we can fall into. It's all about the balance, I think.
Yep.
And I think especially with all of us being home more probably than some of us have in our entire adult lives, man, what a situation to be in, to be not only stressed because of everything that's going on in the world, but then to be with these people that we do love, they're our family, but then to have, if anything, ramped up version of expectations just because of all the additional needs that need to be met. I think of especially the families with school age kids who are managing the e-learning, and in addition to maybe even their own work and all the other things that need to happen around the house. And it's like, man, I wish that we could all mind read so that way we could all meet all of the needs of the house and that we have, and having this expectation that like these people should just know. Like, doesn't everyone around us just know what needs to happen with myself and with each other and around the house? And when we all get together in a space of stress, man, that could be a hot mess, for lack of a better term, pretty regularly, unless there's some attendance to our own care and love and support that, again, starts with ourselves and then can filter out when done well, which, again, so hard to figure out.
Yeah. I really appreciate the example of Christ in his earthly ministry. He regularly took time to go off by himself. The scriptures explicitly say that he regularly went off into the wilderness, had a personal retreat. Maybe he took his disciples with him, maybe he didn't, but he got off on his own. And the truth is, there were still people that needed to be healed. There were still people that needed to be taught. It's not like he didn't have anything to do. There was still a lot of demanding need in the world, but even Christ recognized he has to take care of himself. He was a man, right? He was a human. And so it tells me, if Christ had to be intentional about it, had to set aside time for self-care, then that's a legitimate issue for us, a legitimate concern for us. So, okay, so we've started out this conversation and we were intentional about it. We wanted to establish the need. If you're feeling beaten down, if you're feeling discouraged, if you're feeling irritable, if you're feeling depressed, it's not a surprise. It's been a really, really difficult time that we're in, and it's been hard. And I think there's an accumulative effect that's taken place on longer and longer. And then the second thing we wanted to establish is that self-care isn't selfish. And I love the way you phrased it, Val, that we're not talking about indulging yourself. Yeah, if you're just a hedonistic indulger, kind of putting yourself, well, of course, that's not what we're talking about, right? We're talking about being healthy so you can give health to others, being healthy so you have the energy to really serve others and give to others in the way that you want to. And so that self-care is an okay topic, even for a person of faith. All right. So we started there. So now let's go into issues that come to your mind. Things you see people struggling with, issues that people have to sort through nowadays. What's your experience in your practice or in your own personal life that you see are real strong dynamics right now?
I think now more than ever, there's certainly themes of depression and anxiety that actually may have been present prior to the pandemic, but now are just almost like under a magnifying glass or on steroids, for lack of a better phrase. That it's almost like we really can't ignore it now because it's become so big, or it is more prevalent just because of all the added stress and upsets in the world, right? And what's interesting about that, though, is that depression and anxiety look differently than I think that some people really give it credit for. So oftentimes people think that depression are the folks that like can't get out of bed or can't hold the job, or like they're so low that they're the Debbie Downers of the group and no one wants to hang around them, and the Eeyores, which is true. Like that certainly is a way that depression shows up, but that's not like the full picture. Like depression can look like people really like losing hope in things, or lacking a vision for the future, or feeling stuck, or maybe there is some component of it of like just not wanting to take care of themselves. So it's like, oh, I'm gonna skip a meal because I don't feel like making myself lunch, or I'm gonna take a really long nap because I'm just so tired, even when maybe there's not much going on. So it's interesting how I think, especially now during this time, the mental health even looks differently just because of the circumstances.
Yeah. Matt, what are you seeing?
Well, I want one comment on that is, yeah, I think there are many times that we can continue functioning in life, but while we're functioning, we may have we have no sense of meaning or purpose, or there's no life in the life. And so I'm getting out of bed, but I'm not feeling it anymore. And that's depression. That's depression. So it can look a lot of different ways. I agree. Boy, e-learning is a big topic. For any families with school-age children, we're in that set. Yeah, it's been a whole range of stress, stress that the children are losing the experience of what may be a full year, or at least a good portion of a year, what that will do to their long-term learning, finding ways to have children at home and find ways to work. And a lot of families can't. They're having to choose whether to help their children have the education they want their children to have, or to work and make money to feed their family. Just really challenging decisions that don't have a good answer. No matter what choice you make, there's not a preferable one. And those are gut-wrenching choices that cause a lot of anxiety.
Well, I'll tell you, like for me personally, I have an elderly mother. She's 94 years old. She's in a home. I've seen her like twice since March. I feel horrible. I feel like the world's worst son some days. She's by herself, and it's a horrible situation. But visitors aren't allowed, and she's not allowed to be taken out. And if I took her out, they wouldn't let her come back, and it's a horrible situation. I can't fix it. There's not a good alternative there, it's really difficult.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think a lot of us we're put in these situations where oftentimes it feels like a lose-lose.
Yep,
Like really, no
exactly.
matter which direction we go or what decision we make, there is some type of consequence or what feels like a loss, which can create people to feel stuck or frozen or numb, which again are all depression, anxiety, or what it looks like. And I think that especially when a person feels out of control, or like a decision that they can't, if they make a decision, there's going to be some type of adverse consequence, or there's going to be a loss, or there's going to be some type of bad thing that happens, whatever direction they go, then what that does is that sounds anxiety, even just the way that I said that, right? Like how anxiety producing that, like, no matter what decision I make, something is going to be bad. And also like, oh my gosh, no matter what decision I make, something's going to be bad, right? So there's almost like the wound upness of anxiety, but then the lowness of depression, which also, how confusing is that to feel depressed and anxious at the same time? And like sometimes the way that equalizes out is a person checking out and then numbing, which then creates another myriad of issues, which again is like the big picture of like, no matter what is going on right now, there's some type of loss that happens. Like, wow, either a person can be anxious or depressed or numb and checked out. None of those options sound good. Like, wow, what a situation we're all in right now.
Yep, and I connect with the numbing out. That's me. When I'm not dealing with things well, I can binge Netflix like nobody's business. Where you get that thing popping up saying, "Are you still watching?" You know what? I can get that like 3 different times in one sitting some days.
Yes.
And yeah, and recently I know my eating habits have not been good. But that numbing out is such a temptation. I know you've touched on it, but I want to circle back around to it just for a minute. Classic depression, anxiety symptoms we're familiar with, but what are the less recognized, more subtle signs of struggle, of depression, of anxiety? Can you guys talk a little bit about that, please?
Oh, how about just some general irritability and lack of patience? I think that might be the first place it begins. I've certainly felt a lack of patience here and there, maybe more than a little sometimes. And then this is an interesting one because a loss of interest in things that used to bring us joy or peace or calm is a natural one with depression or anxiety. But these days, a lot of those things that brought us calm and peace have been taken away from us as well.
Mhm.
Perhaps I would love to get to the gym, or I would love to go to church and play with the worship band, which is something that I do,
Yep.
and can't do it. And so maybe I've lost some interest in some things, but then what I might still have some interest in, I can't go do. And that's been such a struggle for so
Mhm.
many people.
Yeah. Well said, Matt.
Yeah, and I think with anxiety, oftentimes like the, poster child for it is a person that's having panic attacks, or
Mhm.
a person who is, like really controlling, or a person that's kind of like spinning out, which certainly there's components of that to it with a person with really extreme anxiety. But in the day to day, like that can look like a person who's actually, they might lose their temper. And so irritability might be like round one of it. But when pushed to a limit, a person might, say something really mean or super act out of character, and maybe even like, feel like they want to, shove something, or, hopefully not resort to violence, but it's not unheard of, right? For a person to really just lose their temper out of feeling so anxious, which that doesn't always make sense all the time. Like, what? Like, how is it that I'm so upset about something and feeling so out of control that then it actually looks like I'm angry, Like sometimes those dots aren't connected. Or with depression, like, oh, I'm maybe feeling a little low, or I'm feeling a little mopey. But sometimes that can feel like a person being so emotive that they're inconsolable, which
Yep.
doesn't always match sometimes with depression. So feeling like teary-eyed or a little weepy, like, okay, that makes sense. But when a person is so upset that they feel like they can't like console themselves, or a person's kind of like, oh wow, this person is so upset, like yikes, what's going on? That doesn't always look like depression either, right? So there's all these different ways that it looks, that sometimes then people don't know how to help themselves, and other people don't know how to help them either, right? Which contributes to then like, well, we don't know what to do, so we're just not going to do anything.
I've seen statistics that have said that during this pandemic, liquor sales have like tripled, or you know what I mean? That if
Yeah.
there's one industry that's doing great, it's liquor stores, and people are drinking much more.
Mhm.
Marijuana is legal now, and marijuana sales have been through the roof, way beyond what the state of Illinois ever anticipated, and so I think people are drinking a lot, and they're smoking a lot, and it's the numb out, it's the cover the pain, it's the cope with the anxiety they're feeling. So all kinds of different ways
Mhm.
that we can
Yeah.
deal with it.
And on a similar note around alcohol and drug sales and use skyrocketing, it's the same with divorce and family stress. There's been, unfortunately, more domestic violence reports made in law enforcement. Like
I've
there's a
wondered
huge,
about that.
a huge rise in it.
Yeah.
And, like that feels scary for me to even say or talk about, because it's like, oh man, like ouch, yikes, right? For families and marriages to also be in crisis around just the stress of being home and not knowing how to oftentimes work through conflict, or having a stress around like, oh man, like we're not really who we used to be 8 months ago, or whenever this thing started, and people are in all kinds of different emotional places or different states, which then just escalates things, which sometimes can get out of hand.
Mhm.
Yeah. So I guess what we're saying in general is that for people watching this, if you're feeling depressed and anxious and worried and concerned and overwhelmed, it does not necessarily reflect some huge personal flaw or some lack of faith or some weakness. This is the world we're living in right now, and it's breeding these kind of emotions and reactions from all of us, I think, in some way, shape, or form. And so don't feel alone, or don't feel weak. This is part of our existence right now.
Mhm.
Absolutely. And to have the courage to articulate your needs, to confide in a friend, to reach out for help, to believe that if you're struggling with any of these issues, there's hope on the horizon. You don't have to keep dealing with this, that you can be proactive and make some changes, do some things for yourself that'll bring health. And that's where I want to go now. Let's talk about specifically self-care. Okay, we've talked all around it, but now what does that mean? How can I become less irritable? How can I make sure I don't drink too much? How can I stop being so crabby with my family? What? So this is, I want those of you who are watching, I want you to understand that this isn't a formal presentation and we have not scripted this. This is a very spontaneous kind of conversation. We don't have a real well laid out game plan here. Okay. So if we're all over the place, that's the reason why. But Val, Matt, now I want you guys to just take off as what comes to mind for you about all these different issues and some practical advice, practical steps we can take, insights we can give people to really help them gain better health.
Mm-hmm.
So
I'll
get out of the way. Go.
Okay. So, it's interesting. Like I was, even as you've been talking about all the themes and all the things that we've all been thrown at this year, and we've all talked about kind of like how rough things have been. Like I've had some anxiety even in my body around like, okay, like let's get to the practical tools, because I don't like staying in the discomfort of even talking about how hard things have been. Like, all right, like let's get to it, because it doesn't feel good even talking about it. Right. So I've even noticed in my own self, like a little like, okay, like let's go, like let's get to it, like that racing, wanting to hurry it up, like let's get to it, which again like shows up as anxiety. Like, so that's just kind of like a practical self-disclosure around how that even looks for me sometimes. So I'm feeling really excited in this moment to be like, yes, let's talk about the tools, or let's talk about what we can do to help, right? And it starts, just in my opinion, with ourselves. So the slowing down, which seems like that would make sense in this time frame, because what else have we all got to do besides stay home and, figure things out? But also, what else do we have to do than just stay home and prefer to watch Netflix or eat a snack or, do the things that would feel better than looking at ourselves? But the intentional practice of stopping and slowing down can be a game changer for people. And even to incorporate that, this is how I do it. I incorporate it actually into my devotional time. So every morning when I am praying and reading a devotion or connecting with God spiritually, I'll take a moment to just take a breath. And it's like, what's happening with actually me this morning? Like, do I feel worried or concerned about something that the day is bringing? Or is there something that I'm even holding from yesterday that I'm bringing into today that's not serving me? How can I give that to God? How can I pray, trusting that, ultimately God will take care of it? I believe that solely in my heart. And though slowing it down to seeing also like, what can I bring to me today to help that feel just even a little bit better? And again, like it seems so simple, like, oh, all she's saying to do is breathe for a moment and slow it down and pray. Like, check, check, check. I can do that. But the actual practical application of it takes so much work to carve aside a couple minutes and to make that happen. That's challenging. And though that initial just first, the slowing down and taking an opportunity to check in with what's going on with you is the first start, right? It's like, that's what we kind of talked about around. It's like, okay, like us first and then other people. Love myself first, and then I can work on loving my neighbors.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah. And there's a lot of lack of self-awareness, right? People can't even articulate how they feel. I'm horrible at that. I'm
Yes.
horrible often at, my wife will say, how was your day? Or how are you feeling? I'm like, I don't know. And I'm not blowing her off. I honestly don't know. And I don't know if that's more of a guy thing or not, or if that's common for women as well. But
Well,
yeah.
I even think it's kind of like customary. Like, I think my version of that is, if I'm asked like, oh, hey, how are you doing? How's your day going? It's almost like I'm conditioned to be like, oh, it's fine. I'm good.
Right. Sure.
When really, but then if I actually like stop myself, I'm like, well, actually, it actually wasn't really that good of a day today. Like, if I'm being honest, like there were some really sad and bad things that happened today. And like, but ew, I don't want to spend time talking about that. Or I don't want to spend more time talking about how awful things are because that just doesn't feel good, right? But the paradox of that is that if we can actually acknowledge and spend time in what doesn't feel good or what's bad, it actually, the validation of that can lift some of those sad and bad feelings to then help us feel better. So
Yeah.
it's oftentimes found, I think, in life and in the world that if we lean into the discomfort, then oftentimes the discomfort resolves. But who wants to do that? I don't always want to do that.
Yeah.
Yep. That's
No,
hard
me
work.
either. Yeah. Yep. Yep. Yeah, I want to pick up on just one little piece of what you were sharing, this idea of worry and concern. I just want to spend a couple of minutes talking about the difference between worry and concern, because we tend to use those words interchangeably. We will say, I'm really concerned about something, or I'm really worried about something, as though they're the same thing. And I don't think they are. And I think it makes a big difference. All right. There are plenty of very important things to be concerned about. Worry, in the way I'm using the word at least, is a repetitive behavior. It's a repetitive thought that goes around and around and around. It burns a lot of energy and a lot of time. And that's about it. It gets us nowhere.
Mhm.
It's rumination is what worry is.
Is it the idea of like, would it be a correct to phrase it like obsessive concern? Is that kind of what you're saying?
Obsessive thinking about a concern.
Uh-huh.
Yeah. I mean, it's when we get stuck, our mind starts, it spins again and again and again about what might happen, what has happened, what could happen, what might I have done, what should I do?
And wouldn't it be like playing out worst case scenario all the time too?
Again and again and again and again.
Mhm.
But the way we equate it, I think many of us believe deep down that if I'm not worrying, that means I don't care.
Mhm.
If I'm not worrying, I must not really be concerned. Or we'll judge people, say that person is out laughing and joking, but this other thing is happening in their life. How can they possibly be living their life and also have a concern? They must not really care. And this belief that so many of us have, I think, is a major problem, because it leads to so much guilt and shame, and it burns so much energy and time with the worrying. And worrying, again, it does not solve anything. It just burns energy and brings us down. Now, I'm not talking about planning or strategizing. Those are forward moving. If there's a problem and I'm working towards it, I'm trying to find a solution
Right.
of something that I actually have some control over.
Yes.
That's not worrying.
Right.
That's
And
not
in,
worrying.
and in fact, taking like tangible steps that we can take are a really good thing, right? In alleviating
Exactly.
anxiety, because it gives you at least a little sense of control, and you're not just
Correct.
being passive, and you do what you can do.
Right. And so that's why I firmly believe the first step in conquering our habit of worrying is to grant ourselves permission not to.
Mhm.
It's not the only step. There's other steps in breaking the habit, but the first step is buying into this idea that worrying is not the same as concern.
Mhm.
It's different, and to grant ourselves permission.
And like, so around that also, having the self-reflection to ask ourselves, how is this serving me? So when I'm stuck in this thought loop or this worry and concern around the state of things or what's going on or the stress of the situation, it's okay to identify there's nothing that I can do about this. And so I need to set it aside, or I need to put this down, or I need to surrender this, or I like seek some counsel with this, right? Like it's okay to acknowledge that we can't be all and do all and control all. And that's a hard thing, I know, for myself to accept a lot of the time. I would really love to be able to do practical and efficient things all the time. And the truth of it is I can't. And so when that happens, it's not accepting defeat or feeling like a failure or feeling like, oh man, like everything is, going to hell in a handbasket. It's like, well, no, it's just okay to acknowledge that, like, I can't spend my energy on this. And so I'm not going to. Right. And so, and like that is really kind of like a self control thing to be able to let it go, set it aside, and move on. If there is something tangible that you do have control of, that you can make a change, by all means, that is helpful.
Yep.
To Matt's point. And if that's not possible, it's also okay to work on letting it go in order to create peace. Like oftentimes peace, people think that, oh, I just wish I could be peaceful. I just want to be happy. I just want to have joy. When really peace is actually a practice that people can implement for themselves. It just takes the discipline really to create it, which oftentimes starts with our own mind and our own feelings.
Right. And the thing too is true peace and true joy can be experienced in spite of our circumstances. You don't need tranquil circumstances. Like that's the only way you can have true peace and joy. I mean, if that
Right.
was the case, we'd seldom experience it, right? I can count the number of tranquil moments I've had in my life on one hand in the last year. I mean, it doesn't happen too often, right?
Right.
Yeah, I think too, people of faith have resources that are extremely helpful, extremely beneficial. One is prayer.
Yes.
I was just thinking of, Philippians 4, verse 6 and 7. Don't worry about anything. Instead, pray about everything. Tell God what you need and thank him for all he has done. Then you will experience God's peace, which exceeds anything we can understand. His peace will guard your hearts and minds as you live in Christ Jesus. And so prayer faith isn't like a form of denial, like an ostrich sticking its head in the sand. You're fully aware of what you're going through and what you're dealing with. But what you choose to do is take it to God, to lift it off your own shoulders and in faith, give it to God, believing he's in control, believing he cares about you, believing that, he'll help you deal with that. And it also brings to mind, like 1 Peter 5, verse 7, cast all your anxiety upon him because he cares for you. And so for myself, I'll visualize literally my taking this giant heavy weight off my shoulders, whatever it is, and in faith, moving it onto God's shoulders. He's got much bigger shoulders than I do,
Yeah.
And I think it's one of the huge, for lack of a better term, benefits there is to being a person of faith right now.
Yeah. It's always struck me, Matthew 11, 28, I think, 28. But come unto me, all ye who are weary and burdened, and I will give you not freedom from all your troubles. I will give you rest. I will give you rest. And so often we need rest from the burdens of life, and that's Christ can give us.
Yeah, for sure. So the worry and concern thing, I really appreciate the distinctions that you've made there between worry and concern and getting your mind out of that downward spiral, right? So like if a person feels like they're like in a vortex, okay, like they're going down fast, it's easier said than done. Don't worry or don't obsess, right? So can you speak to like when you feel like I'm in a really bad place, how do you break out of that? It's a lot easier said than done. So a person in that position, what would you say?
You want to jump in, Val? You want me to jump in?
Go ahead. I'm collecting my thoughts. I'm like, oh, I have so much I want to say about all these things.
Yep. Well, both of you get it all out, okay, for our benefit. Get it all out.
All right. Well, it's a big question, right? When we're in the lowest of lows, I think part of what brings us to that that overwhelmed position is the fact that there is so much going on in life, and it feels like it's insurmountable because how am I possibly going to address all of it? And that's part of why I'm feeling so overwhelmed, because I've convinced myself I have to address all of it right now to feel better. And of course we can't. Of course we cannot. We have to prioritize and figure, here is a starting point. I can't jump from point 1 to point 326. Right? My goal is to move from where I am up 1 notch. What can I do to start there? And
Baby steps.
Generally, again, we've baby steps. We're quoting What About Bob now?
Only the best movie ever made, but I'm sure that inspired you guys into your careers, didn't it?
Absolutely.
See, now I lost my train of thought, Dave.
Dr. Leo Marvin, I apologize.
1 notch.
Go ahead.
1 notch.
Yeah, right. Exactly.
But
I'll shut up.
1 notch. And so, no, but it's really prioritize. Like, here's one step I can make that I have control over. And when we're in that deep of a state, the first step is, I think, well, can I say there's 2 first steps? I think there's 2 first steps. One is not doing it alone. Reaching out, and if you're a person who you feel that you are truly alone right now, one, you're not, because God's right there, and He's always accessible through prayer, and the Scripture is always there. It reminds you of that. If you're watching this, there is a church body ready to embrace you, so you don't have to be alone. You do not have to be alone in this. Outside of that, there are lots of support networks and numbers you can call. And so don't do it alone. Don't try to do it alone if you're in that low of a place, because I don't think we're designed that way to do this thing called life alone, right? So 1 is reach out. 2, I'm a big believer, it's physiology first. It's our body. If when our mind, our emotions are so low, our body generally is as well. We need healthy nutrients. We need water. We need sleep. There are basic things we need. It sounds simple, but when we're that low, it's not so simple. People eat too much of the wrong things. They eat way too little of anything. We sleep way too much. We sleep way too little. We get completely out of balance physiologically, which makes it so much more difficult to make good, healthy choices and to think things through. So I'd say those are the first 2 steps to begin to turn things around.
And I think that both of those things, again, like, I think when we're thinking of self-care or what it is to maybe take a different direction for betterment, like, we would really like for those things to be easy, but they're not. And so reaching out for support and taking care of ourselves, even physically, especially during difficult times, those are some of the hardest things that a person can do in a vulnerable moment, to say to a friend or to a family member or to anyone, I'm not well. Those are some of the hardest words or things that a person can say to other human beings. And the block oftentimes is that those bad feelings around feeling sad, mad, shameful, full of maybe even guilt or resentment. Like, there's all types of things that show up with people around what stands in their way of asking for help, right? Even though it's one of the most pivotal things that a person can do. And it's like, I even think of Jesus, for example, who, if he truly wanted to, he could have done the whole evangelism thing on his own. He could have brought God's word to the nations. He probably actually didn't need help, but he chose help with his disciples. He wanted his friends and people around him because he knew that was what was going to be more effective when it comes to reaching people, right? There are sole examples in the Bible around most of the prophets or people that God appointed doing things alone, right? And so it's not by accident that it's already modeled the importance of each other and connection. And people oftentimes are their worst selves when they are in isolation or don't have support or community around them. And Matt, I loved it when you said that there is a church body really able and ready to embrace, because that's how God also designed the church. Not for a place for people to show up and look good and act perfect and have it all together when it comes to the Christian life, but as a place for support and fellowship, and a place where God's people can come for refuge and for counsel. And like that's quite literally the design of the body of Christ, right? For people to be held up in moments of weakness. And then when there's strength, for people to bring their strength to those that need it, right?
Yep.
And I just think that that is oftentimes lost so often, which is just such a loss in and of itself, for people to feel like they can't reach out or they can't get the help or support that they want because of all the stories that we tell ourselves around how we need to have it together, or oh, it's not so bad, I'm going to do it on my own, or oh, today's just a bad day, tomorrow will be better, so I'm just going to forget about how awful I feel or how bad things are, right? When really, like, it's those exact things is what keeps people in that cycle of things being really bad.
Yep.
Dave, to your original point, like what keeps people
Yeah.
stuck is often all the things that we tell ourselves around
Yep.
it being fine or it being normal or whatever it is, when really, you know, like when Matt was talking about the difference between worry and concern, for people to get stuck in those thought loops or to ruminate, that's actually, COVID aside, not okay. For people to feel like they're so anxious or stuck on something or they can't let it go. Like sometimes people think that that's just a normal way of thinking, when really that's generalized anxiety, right? Or like people think that it's okay to just like feel really low all the time or to feel depressed or to feel sad, when really, like, well, there's treatment for that, right? Or like there could be intervention for that, but people just don't realize it because it's so normal for people to feel anxious and depressed. Just like, unfortunately, it's really normal for people to feel like they have to have it all together or do it alone.
Yeah.
Yeah, I really appreciate your emphasis you both placed on that. I remember my spiritual mentor, he always used to say that the church isn't a museum for saints, it's a hospital for sinners,
Yeah.
and recognizing we are all broken people.
Mhm.
And, you see like on social media, right? Like on Facebook or Instagram, all the photos are of wonderful, lovely family moments, right? And great dinners and awesome vacations. And you look at that and you think, am I the only cruddy family around? Is, I mean, and we just idealize like other people's lives and the way they're portrayed through social media, and we start to feel very, very isolated, like we're the only ones who don't have the
Mhm.
nice things, and aren't smiling all the time. And you can go to church and look around you, and I think that's the deceptive thing. You can't look at a person and know what they're going through,
Mhm.
No.
and we put up facades of things are okay, and that fear keeps us from being vulnerable. But what it does, unfortunately, is it isolates other people who think they're the only ones who are broken, they're the only
Mhm.
ones who are struggling. And that's a huge that's a huge lie, right?
Yes.
Everybody's broken, everybody's struggling to one degree or another. And an issue I might not struggle with,
Mhm.
and you do, but you have areas where you don't struggle and I do, but so that community, that
Yeah. Another thing that came to my mind that is blocking many people from accessing resources out there, I hear this so often, is it'll come something like, for example, I don't think I'm going to watch the Sunday morning service online because it just isn't the same as being there in person. Or I used to go to have this coffee group. We always got together, and yeah, some of them want to get together over Zoom, but it just isn't the same. So I don't want to do it. And let's acknowledge it's not the same. It's absolutely right. It is not the same. Emotionally, it may not even be close to the same. But is it better? Does it serve us better in a healthier way to take what we can get, to take that initiative to engage how we can, rather than choosing not to engage at all? I think so many people are choosing not to engage at all because it's different or because it reminds them of how different things are, but they're robbing themselves of the benefits of the support that's out there.
Mhm.
That's really good insight, Matt. And yeah, I've heard that a gazillion times as well regarding
Yeah.
church.
Mhm.
People have tuned out because they're like, oh, that sucks. That's not nearly as good. You know?
Well, yeah.
What else is on your mind? You guys have been gifted by God, and you're about walking people through issues like this, or just random thoughts. Okay, they don't have to have any connection necessarily, but before we close, and I'd like to wrap things up in the next 5 to 10 minutes. What would you say? What would you want to say? Otherwise, you'd be not happy at the end of the recording.
I think one of the things that feels like a practical start is like, okay, so if you have a worry that maybe you're not doing well, like, oh, wow, I've been listening to these people talk about mental health and the stresses and like, am I okay? Like, are things really bad? So like a good way to check in with yourself and identify that is check in with your body first. Our bodies are an incredible resource for telling us everything about ourselves, really. It's like there's a whole study around multiple studies actually around how our bodies can really heal when taking ourselves mentally when we're listening to ourselves properly. And so some of that is the foundational, making sure that you're drinking enough water, eating food, and sleeping. But even zeroing in on those three things, like sleep, for example, like most people report like, oh, I'm just a bad sleeper. Like I'm kind of up and down throughout the night, or I have a hard time falling asleep, or like I wake up really early and then can't go back to sleep, but like, oh, well, I've always been like that. Well, it's like, okay, maybe there's some type of component around some type of sleep disturbance or sleep issue, but oftentimes sleep is reflective of how a person is actually doing emotionally or mentally. And so if that's a concern for you, check out with yourself, like, like, have I always had sleep issues? Or has this been something that has happened because of the pandemic? Or do I find that I've been sleeping worse since everything has happened with COVID? So really like helping yourself think about like what is showing up with this, or eating, for example. Like, okay, fine, I've always been known to like have an extra treat, or like I certainly like to have, an extra helping if I'm really hungry. But like, okay, in this time though, has that been in excess? It's like, have you been dissatisfied with maybe possible weight gain, or you've noticed that you're feeling not your best self physically? Instead of ignoring that, or just like kind of like falling prey to, oh, it's fine, it's not a big deal, it's just because of the pandemic. Or it's like I've even heard these like taglines around, like people oftentimes say in college, like, oh, a person gained the freshman 15. People are saying, oh, I've gained the COVID 20. And it's like, oh, is that a thing now? Like that doesn't sound healthy. you know and so like it can become a trend, but it doesn't necessarily mean that it's acceptable or okay, right? So for yourself to even start this process of checking in with yourself or identifying what might be working or what's not working, starting just with your body is a really good and practical place to start. And then if there's anything that you notice with yourself physically, attend to it physically, right? So if you're noticing that, you're like super, super thirsty, drink a really big glass of water, right? Like that's a good place to start. And though, if you're noticing that cheers. If you're noticing that the, lack of drinking water also might be contributing to like other feelings that might show up or other things that might be happening mentally or emotionally, pay attention to that too, because the linked between the person's physical self and their emotional and mental, and I would also venture spiritual, is all connected.
Absolutely. Yep.
Yeah.
Great insight, Bill.
Yeah, good. I think what I'd like to share for my last thought here, I'd like to offer a very practical tool to intentionally infuse moments of joy into daily life. And something that it doesn't require going outside at all. It can, but in these days when we're locked in, ways to just infuse joy because we require it. So here's an idea. Think about your five senses. We've been blessed with these wonderful senses, and to really consider, for example, what aromas do I enjoy? What just brings me enjoyment? I have a candle back here that I found, this wonderful banana nut bread candle.
Ooh.
It's wonderful. I know, it's spectacular. I until it's gone, I burn it while I'm working because it just brings me joy. And it's a way, it's just there. It's just in the air. But you think, come up with 5 different aromas you enjoy. Think about, what do you love to listen to? Is it different kinds of music? Is it silence, where you can get headphones that give you silence? Is it a white noise to block things out? Is it whatever it is? What sounds? What visuals? I have an Escher book. If anyone knows Escher, all the strange drawings with the optical illusions and such. I've looked at it 100 times. I love looking through it. Visually, it brings me joy. Tactile. Is it certain clothing that you love to wear on certain days because it just makes you feel good? On and on and on. But to intentionally have these things ready for yourself in your day-to-day life while you're going about your life. Because again, God has blessed us with these sensations. Let's use them in this time of trial and trouble to help fill us up in these tangible ways.
That's good stuff.
Man, I love that so much. And even like, I'm like, man, I want to do that. I want a yummy smelling candle right where I work too. Like, I love that. And
Exactly.
like something I think that's also been trending on social media is like the whole, people have been putting their Christmas decorations up early.
Yes.
And there's like a
I
whole like
love
group
that.
of people that are like adamantly against it. Like, no Christmas
Yeah.
trees up until after Thanksgiving. But it's like, who cares? Like, if it brings you joy, put up your Christmas tree, right? And
Yeah.
like that, like, so my whole like piggybacking off of what Matt was saying is, there doesn't have to be rules around what brings you joy, even if it's a little outside of the box. So, you know, if you want to put up your Christmas tree before Thanksgiving because it brings you joy, go for it. I did that. My Christmas tree has been up for actually 3 weeks. I was one of those people that put my Christmas tree up way earlier than probably I would have in any normal year.
Yep.
You can email me your gripes about that if you want to, right? But
Nope.
I can honestly say that in the morning when I turn the lights on and when I'm drinking my coffee with my favorite coffee creamer, I feel joy looking at my Christmas tree and drinking my favorite cup of coffee. So
Yep.
it's like, yay, go for it. Do the thing that brings you joy, even if you might get some people who have opinions about it.
Preach. You're right.
Yeah.
You know,
And-
I've been. Go ahead,
Well, I
Matt.
was gonna say, and I do not consider these ideas self-indulgence. I consider all this self-care.
Yeah.
Right? If it brings you joy and allows you to go about your life functioning and caring for others and caring for yourself in a healthier and better way, that's self-care. If it
Yep.
gets in the way of your doing those things, that can be self-indulgence or something else. But these are ideas about, there's nothing wrong with in putting things in your life that bring you joy if it helps you function better and healthier. I think, why wouldn't we do that?
Yeah. Absolutely right. Yeah, I got a confession's good for the soul. So I will confess that I was a Christmas Pharisee, right? And anyone who, you know, started celebrating before Thanksgiving, not good. You know, I have changed. I don't believe that anymore, at least for 2020. Maybe in 2021, I'll be a Christmas Pharisee again. But for now, I'm like, absolutely, man. Get it.
Does that mean your tree's already up?
It is not. But I'm not judgmental of you if you have yours up. That's my point, right?
Just checking.
Yeah. Okay. So I'm going to put you on the spot, hopefully not too much, and I'll go first so you have time to think. All right. But share one specific, tangible self-care thing you do that works for you, that's super important to you, that you've been very intentional about self-care in your own life. All right. Give one tangible example of why you do it, how you do it. I'll go first, give you time to think. But I've been very intentional about, I have a real strong connection to nature. I love being outdoors. And so I make it a point to get outside normally at least a couple of times a day and go for a walk. And sometimes it's a 10-minute walk. Sometimes I'm out there for an hour. You know, it's a long walk. But for me, for the way I'm built, it's extremely rejuvenating. It's extremely important for me. And it's intentional self-care, because sometimes when I go for a walk, I've still got emails to answer. I've still got phone calls to make. It's not like I'm going for a walk because I've gotten everything done, right? I'm going for a walk because I need a walk. And then when I come back, I will be more productive. I'll be more energetic, you know, and it's a good thing for me. And obviously the walk stimulates me physically, but also my spirit, my mind has a chance to clear, you know, and so going outside, going for a walk is a huge self-care thing for me. What do you guys have?
I have many that I'm just thinking like, oh man, they're all just like so small. It almost seems kind of silly.
Well, you can do more than one then if you want. But
yeah. Well, so when I'm thinking about that kind of like touches a bunch of the different bases is the quiet time, which again seems silly because like I work at home. I'm remote, so like I'm kind of like slowed down all day. You know, it's like, and because I've been on maternity leave, like I'm at home, right? But the intentional carved aside quiet time is for me what gives me that slowed, restful care that my soul and my body needs. And so oftentimes what that looks like is I will be looking at my Christmas tree because I really love my Christmas tree, but I will make myself drink water in that time. It's like, okay, like what I know for myself is that in order for my body to feel well, I have to be hydrated. So I'm going to drink a really big glass of water and I'm going to slow down. Oftentimes in the morning, that looks like my prayer, devotion, meditation time as well. But throughout the day, I make myself sit and be quiet and take even moments to slow down, even amidst there being a ton of stuff to do. So, you know, between client calls, when there's emails and voicemails, and oh, I hear that the laundry went off, I could change the laundry or unload the dishwasher or pick up the baby stuff or whatever it is. There's a whole bunch of things that's always going to vie for my attention. But the self care that I make myself do is like, nope, but right now, in order for me to be the most effective, best version of me, I need to stop and sit and be quiet and calm internally. So that way I can, you know, be my best self for the rest of the day by being quiet for just a couple minutes.
That's great stuff.
Yeah. I think the one I'm going to choose to share here, I've been very imperfect with this, but I'm trying. I've been working hard at it. But there's a combination of self-care and I think family care too. I think it serves both functions. But one thing I've tried hard to do is, of course, in this specific job that Val and I have, we have talked with a lot of people, and they can have some very heavy hours talking with people about some very heavy issues, and that heaviness can linger if you're not very, very intentional. So something I've done for my self-care in general this year is, with my kids being home all the time also, is that I try very hard to take moments between sessions when I'm talking with people or just in general. If I just have 30 seconds to go out and have a moment of joy with my boys, to go sneak up and tickle them, or just to go and check on them and just to connect. It's mainly about connection, to make sure that that connection is ever present and growing, and make sure that I put a smile on my face for them, which is good self-care for me. Make sure I'm not getting pulled into anxiety or depression states myself with the pandemic and everything else going on. And I think it's good for them and good for us. And so intentionally finding moments throughout the day as often as possible to connect is excellent self-care for me.
That's great. I love that. That's really good. As we wrap up this webinar, final thing I want to throw at each of you, okay? Like from an assessment standpoint, Um, how does a person know when things are critical? You know, when they need to, how would you phrase it? Call 911, see a professional. You know, they're in a real critical, dangerous place where it goes beyond just joining a small group, or it goes beyond reading your Bible. And as a pastor, that almost sounds heretical, right? Reading your Bible's not enough. Being in a small group's not enough. And the answer is, no, sometimes it's not enough. You know, that more intensive type help is needed. Can you help our listener, our viewer, um, do a self-assessment to evaluate that? You understand where I'm going with this? Yeah.
Yep.
Go
Yeah,
ahead.
I'll jump in. The first I hope is an obvious one, that if you're having any kind of thought about what it might be if you weren't around anymore, what it might be like if you were dead, or having even more active thoughts about making plans, it's time to call 911. It's it's time to get support now, right now. In fact, stop watching us and go make the phone call. If you're finding that your hopelessness has progressed to the point where you're no longer able to care for yourself, that you're finding you're not eating, or that you're not bathing, or that you're it's such a struggle to get off the couch or out of bed that it's almost painful to do so.
And
It's
you're
time
missing, yeah, if you find yourself missing work regularly and that kind of thing.
missing work, not able to care for your children or for your parent or whomever it is. It is past time to get help, and there is help out there. That's the wonderful part, is there is help ready for you. It's time.
Yeah, the saying in mental health is, if you are feeling at risk of harming yourself or harming others, then it's time to get immediate help. And harm, in the maybe like more dramatic sense, is self-harm, which could be like those suicidal thoughts that Matt was talking about, or hurting yourself, either that be in a violent way or in a more adverse way, around the not eating, not getting up, not taking care of yourself, that type of thing. Those are all harming to
Or
yourself.
substances.
Substances, yes.
Yeah.
And the harm to others is, that could be physical. Like if you're feeling like, oh my gosh, I really lost my temper. I cannot believe that I hurt my partner, or I cannot believe that I did that to my child. Like, it's time. Losing your temper from time to time is one thing, but when it crosses a threshold of it being violent or abusive, it's time to check yourself and to get some support, right? Around, either that's calling 911, or that's immediately trying to reach out to a mental health professional to get support, making an appointment, doing what is going to best serve you and your family. And again, like, so I think we're talking about those, like, really, like, the big and scary stuff. Like, oh my gosh, like, no one likes to talk about suicidal thoughts or about violence or abuse. Like, oh, it's so, like, scary, risky, like, ouch, that hurts. And though, again, like the more subtle, around the not getting up, not taking care of yourself, not eating, or not showing up to work, kind of like ditching your friends. If, you had even like a Zoom call scheduled, or you're not answering your phone to talk to people that you normally talk to on a regular basis. These are all warning signs to be aware of, around, maybe I'm declining, or maybe I'm not headed in the direction that I want to in order to be healthy. Another thing that I've heard clients talk about, that I think, I certainly can identify with sometimes, is like, do I feel like a sense of like darkness? Like, are my thoughts dark? Like, do I feel really negative? Am I failing to see a silver lining, or failing to see hope or love or joy? Right. So it's like, when there's a darkness or lack thereof of being able to like hold the bigger picture, oftentimes that's when it's time to get help too. when things feel really like collapsed or condensed, or, it's like you're kind of not able to see out, that's time then too, to be like, okay, I need a second opinion, or I need someone to like speak some life into me because I don't have life right now for myself. Right. And hard to identify, but so critical, because intervention is quite literally life-saving in those moments.
Yeah. Yep. And of course, we're commenting on the biggest, scariest, most imminent pieces right now that might be 911 or a call of some kind. I would also say, if you're feeling lonely, it is time to not necessarily make a 911 call, but it's way past time to reach out.
Yeah.
To friend, family, church body, to a support group, to a therapist, to reaching out. It's time. Loneliness, not being able to see a way that things can get better, not feeling suicidal, but feeling stuck. I just don't, we're not meant to do this thing called life alone. And so if you're alone, it's past time to reach out.
Yes, absolutely. Great. Well, thank you. Yeah. For those of you who are watching, we want you to know that you really aren't alone. We want to encourage you to reach out to our church. You call the church office, leave a message. Somebody will get back to you. We want to provide resources for you. We want to provide a listening ear for you. We want to do what we can. And so have the courage to reach out. But in the meantime, think through what you just heard in this last hour and 15 minutes. There's a lot of practical, tangible advice, baby steps you can take to take care of yourself and be the best version of you. I like that a lot. So Val and Matt, thank you so much. I really appreciate your willingness to be a part of this. It was just great tapping into your expertise. So thank you.
It's been a pleasure.
All right. Everybody, thanks for being with us. God bless.